Good morning. Want to welcome everybody to week two for your Newman University graduate course, Strategic Management. And today we'll be looking over chapter 3 and chapter 4, and also discussing a little bit contextually about how those two topics fit in some of the day's events that we're currently going through. First, chapter 3, internal analysis, distinctive competencies, competitive advantage, and profitability. And we'll first discuss competitive advantage and what that's comprised of. And the book talks about three primary areas of that: value chains, competitive advantage and profitability, and then innovation. So we'll talk about all of these a little bit today. First, on value chains, this is probably one of the most interesting topics right now, because the concept of value chains has just morphed dramatically in the recent months due to recent events surrounding the virus. There's entirely new demands on products and companies as a result of the forces that have been in effect in the last 6 to 9 months. And so a lot of things in terms of value chains right now come down to safety, security, and access. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail coming up. But so value chains and how you access markets, products, things like that has changed dramatically. And we'll visit that just a little bit more in a couple of minutes. Competitive advantage and profitability, as always, and I think even more impactful, and I think has really been highlighted, the importance of this is sustainability and a competitive advantage. As we've all seen in the last decade or so, the sustainability of competitive advantages, the cycle time for that continues to shrink. Cycle time for competitors to catch up and even surpass a company's competitive advantage just as shrinking as we speak, and it has reduced markedly in the past couple of decades, particularly in the last decade. And so we'll look at a little bit what impacts the durability of competitive advantage, and that primarily comes down to innovation. And we think about innovation in terms of products, even services, obviously. But sometimes we don't think about innovation in terms of organizations and organizational design. So in terms of products, we obviously think of quality, features, needs fulfillment, services. Think of just the different types of service availability and the creative ways to make our services available to people, whether it be expanding times that services are available or how we deliver them. Maybe we deliver them remotely instead of people having to come to us. Recently, I see in our neighborhood periodically a big van, a pretty tricked out van, that takes dog grooming to customers instead of us having to take our dogs to them. And so there are several customers that seem to avail themselves of this, because I see that dog van around a lot, at least over on this side of town. Another area is creating multiple or additional uses for your products or services. There's an episode on Big Bang Theory recently, and one of the characters on that is a pharmaceutical representative, and she was kind of tongue-in-cheek joking about the fact that one of their drugs didn't really pan out so well, but it uh, ended up being utilized to help combat some of the downsides of another drug that they had. And so sometimes those types of things happen. You might find an alternative use. Coca-Cola, for example, started out as a drug, not as a soft drink or a refreshment. And so there's numerous cases, Post-it notes. There's any number of cases of things that started out being one thing, and companies were able to find alternative uses, and in many cases, even better uses for the features of that particular product. The last thing I want to talk about on innovation is organizational innovation. Being innovative in the ways that organizations operate, manage, and conduct themselves. A lot of companies don't think about this function, this feature, but in many ways, that can be a huge competitive advantage. Think about distribution. Think about Amazon and the way that they've shown organizational innovation. Instead of having all of their people to go out and get the products, they have little robots actually bring the shelves to them. And those become core competencies. Those become competitive advantages. Caterpillar is very well known for their construction equipment, but they're also just as well known for their distribution capabilities and their core competencies. And they actually have a business model and a separate business unit that does that type of distribution for other organizations, and in some cases, even their competitors. So organizational innovation can at many times be just as impactful and just as important as product and service innovation. And I would think that coming out of this COVID-19 and the coronavirus, I think organizational innovation is going to be key. Think about restaurants. If you think about a restaurant right now, if you're a chain even, or if you're an individual, if you're going to design and build a restaurant after coronavirus, it will and should be different than what it would have been before. I think restaurants in the future will have huge capabilities in terms of their ability to do takeout. Obviously, maybe some will even play around with drive-throughs to where people can just drive through and get their meals and their food. So I think you'll see a lot of businesses really tweaking and thinking about their organizational capabilities and how they design their organizations in light of everything that's just happened. And the final area of competitive advantage, and this one to me is huge, is market access. The last week, Porter's Five Forces introduced a sixth, or the book introduced a sixth potential force. I think it was complementary products. And I think it was very interesting, the case they made for that. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. But when you're looking and you're analyzing industries, I think there's another force that really needs to be reckoned with and dealt with. And I think it's just as important as complementary products. I think that is market access. And that is something that we, even a year ago, took for granted or took more for granted. Today, not so much. And when I'm talking about market access, I'm talking about not only to suppliers and distribution of products, things like that. I'm talking about market access to our customers, our customer bases. You know, think about the restaurants, think about the bars, think about the entertainment venues that have been shut out of access to their very customer bases. You know, suppliers could be in that, depending on where your suppliers are and what how this whole thing has impacted them. And then inputs from products or raw materials for products. There's probably a lot of manufacturing businesses that have had a really difficult time accessing even their raw materials for their products as we've gone through this. And then, as I noted, distribution of the product itself. So as a result of everything that's gone on over the last 9 months or so, companies are going to be relooking all of this in the coming decade. Where they make their products, what's their manufacturing footprint, all of that's going to be reanalyzed. Redundancies of distribution, manufacturing, service points, all of that's going to be relooked. And probably more importantly is industry selection itself. What types of industry should and do we want to be in, and which ones, based on everything that's happened over the last year or so, do we want to avoid? And we'll talk a little bit more about that even as we get into the next chapter. So people are going to be looking at jobs in a new way. Where are the jobs that were not disrupted through all of this? It's going to change the way we think about even our own careers. So I think it's going to be very difficult to find much that's not going to be impacted from what's happened in this last 9 months or so. The last area on chapter 3, they talked about is profitability. And, tax rates have been discussed a lot over the last few years as the Republicans have reduced tax rates for individuals, but even more importantly, for businesses. And many businesses have been enjoying those breaks and been glad that they've had them, but do we have the right equilibrium with all that? But it has made it easier for businesses to build capital. I know with our company, when we sold in the last year or so, one of the things that was a challenge for us was building capital previous to these tax cuts, because when you got over $100,000 in profitability, it was not unusual if you made over 100,000, you could be looking at 40 to 50% taxes on that as a company. And so it made it hard and difficult for you to build capital and to keep capital in your business. And so I think it's good that we probably cut tax rates some, but did we overdo it? Do we have the right equilibrium? I think that's something that we'll have to judge as we go down this road, and there will be a little bit of a tug of war on that between the political parties. Okay, chapter 4, building competitive advantage through functional level strategies. A few things I want to talk about on this, and then after this chapter, I want to kind of put all this in context again in light of everything that we're going through. Functional level strategies, 4 primary factors of that are efficiency, quality, innovation, and customer responsiveness. The roots of improving functional strategies and competitive advantage are some of the following. First of all is resources. And as we've noted recently, that can even be access to resources. Distinctive competencies is the next. What differentiates your company from competitors? And some of those key factors that could differentiate your company are strength, which could be your financial strength of your company, which can lend itself to sustainability. Market access, whether it be regional, global, national, multi-unit, whatever the case may be. The product itself and or your services. All of those could differentiate you from your competitors in the marketplace and should differentiate yourself. The third thing, improving functional strategies and competitive advantage, is capabilities, organizational capabilities. And some of the key components of that are sophistication level of your organization, special skills and core competencies, and being a low cost or value creation provider. And then finally, superior profitability, which again, lends itself to financial strength and sustainability and adaptability to macroeconomic events, which again, coronavirus is kind of exhibit A as to the types of body blows and the things that can happen to a company and test its variability to survive. So how does all this add up, especially in today's environment? A few things. Look at the opportunities for those companies that survive. What's happening right now, especially, probably no better example than the retail industry. What's happened right now has cleared out a lot of landscape for those that survive. It should be easier for companies to distinguish themselves in the marketplace with the reduction of the competition or even clutter in the market, if you will. And it should provide opportunities for growth and more consolidation of markets for those that survive. So in closing for this week, with any challenge or situation, such as we face currently, it can bring tremendous opportunities and some advantages. I want to highlight a few of what those might look like. But first of all, you have to be able to take the hits and outlast both the challenge itself and your competitors. So that's where your financial strength comes in. This is the reason you have to examine closely the industry and business that you choose to be a part of, and whether you're looking at investing or owning a business, or whether you're looking at working for a business. There are businesses that thrive through this period that we're going through right now, and there are others that were devastated by it. I have an analogy for all of you to consider when you think about today's events and everything that's happening around us. The hometown that I lived in, Great Bend, Kansas, in the early 80s had a massive flood. And one of the opportunities when there's a massive flood in an area is the drawing of the floodplain map. It allows you to see the areas of greatest risk, as well as those that were and probably never will be affected by a flood. So it lets you see in stark contrast those areas that were higher, that were able to outlast that flood and stay above it, and the areas that were submerged and the ones that are at the greatest risk. Well, think about what we're going through today as an economic flood. And now we're all going to be, in one way or another, looking at and developing our economic floodplain map. We have a chance to see what regions, jobs, and industries were most affected by this period. And we should all take note and let the results of this advise our decisions moving forward. And it should impact, in some ways, what we do professionally, possibly even where we live, and most importantly, considering what industries we're a part of and or maybe even avoid. We have that opportunity. We're seeing in very stark contrast those that were able to get through a period like this and those that were not, at least quite as successfully. So let's not let those lessons be lost. Let's learn from them. I'm not saying that makes you change your directions at this point in your life, but I think you should at least consider all of those alternatives and think about it as you look at how you move your life forward. And if you have a fork in the road, say if you lose a job, or say if you feel like you're at an opportunity or a point in your life where you can make some changes, what happened in this period of time should be at least considered as you move forward. All right, well, that's all I've got for this week. I want everybody to take care and be safe, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week, and might have some supplemental stuff as the week goes on, so be sure and pay attention to your announcements. All right, well, thank you all very much, and we'll talk to you next week.